Welcome back to Code Reviews. All right, in this video, we're going to pick up where we left off. And where we left off last time was building our very first Spring controller. So in branch 00, we built a Spring Boot controller. Very simple. It was just a health check that responded when we put in the address. It was a GET request, and it ran on HTTP. Now, if you'll remember, one of the issues that we had was that although we could curl the URL that we're running on, HTTP localhost 5001/health, so we could curl, when you actually went to this in Chrome, it didn't load. And it didn't load because it wasn't a secure connection. So basically everything that we write has to run on HTTPS. Anything you do in production, anything worth doing, it's going to have to be on HTTPS. So it's kind of a must that we get there. This is pretty much useless to us. So we have another branch called 01, which is running it on HTTPS. And this is the code review that we're going to go through today. So what do we do to get this running? Well, fortunately, it only takes a few code changes. So we're back into this bin directory where I've created a new executable that's called enable localhost HTTPS. And essentially what this does is, I didn't know how to do this before. It was a pretty clear error, but there's a bunch of stuff online, which is how to get your local development running on HTTPS quickly. And this is to mimic, your production environment, which is going to use SSL. So essentially what I did was I went through this, I went through the problem and the solution, and I took all of these commands, and these are just bash commands that you had to run, and I put them into one Uber script that could be run all at once. So when you go to the repo, I have put together a script for you in bin that once you clone this repo, you can just run and generate your own stuff locally. With everything else, it comes with the help. So you have bin directory, SSL, do H. It says docs and commands to get your local set up and to run the Spring Boot server on HTTPS. Note that this is solely for development purposes and not meant in any way to be used in a production environment. So you're basically going to create a self-signed certificate, make sure your Mac can read it, your Chrome or whatever browser you're using can read it, and then you will be able to view it like you would any other website online. So that's kind of the first thing that we did, was chain together all of these commands and put in some echo statements about what we're doing and why, and some manual steps that you have to do to walk you through that. So once you check out this repo, you got to run this command, and we'll go through that in a second. In the POM, something we talked about last time, but I actually realized later that in the POM, I had too many dependencies, like duplicate dependencies. So all I really needed was Spring Boot Starter Web. I didn't need the Spring Boot Starter and the Spring Web MVC and the Spring Boot Starter Web. Didn't need all those. You really should keep your dependencies clean and organized. Don't let them get out of control. Always kind of understand what you're importing and why. Keep it clean. So that's something that we did. And then with 3.2 Spring Boot, you can actually do a little bit more request mapping. So we just improved, we used the request mapping annotation. We gave it the value, which is the path we're using. We specified that it was a GET request, and then we specified what it produces, which is application.json. So we did that. That's just something that we should do, a best practice. So very, very small addition there. And then in our properties file, this is where you're kind of telling Spring, hey, I want you to run using SSL, and this is the information I want to use. So we're changing our port to 8443, which is the SSL port. And then, technically 443 is, but we'll use 8443. Then we're saying, yes, enable SSL. this is the key alias. This is set up when you create your certificate. This is the password, which is used when you create the certificate. This is the certificate. So it's going to be in your class path, which is the resources directory, where this is stored in the key store folder. It's going to be called server P12. And then this is the password again. And that's all you need to do, provided you have the self-signed certificate, provided that you've created the certificate and you've signed it. So just getting started, if you try to run this, I have not created the, start, build, and run. So I haven't created the certificate yet, and I also haven't loaded it on my system because I haven't created it. So Spring's going to try and start, and it's going to throw up, and it's going to say unable to start web server, could not load from class path the server P12, and it couldn't resolve this key store because it doesn't exist. So where we want to end up putting this is with the application property and resources. There is a key store directory, but there's nothing in it, right? So this is what the script I've created will do. So once you've cloned the repo and you've checked out the branch, you're on 0.1, you can run the bin SSL enable localhost HTTPS. And so it's going to make the directory, if you need it, that key store directory, it's already there. It's going to ask if you want to delete all the files that are already there. Let's say I don't need to do that. So we're proceeding without generating the files. And then we're going to generate an RSA248 key and save it to a file root.ca. So all this is basically in the documentation that I've linked to. I suggest using a password of 123 for development purposes. So we'll do that. Password 123. Password 123 again. So now you need a passphrase. Again, I would just leave it the same as what we have above. So this is some optional information that you can include or not. If you have an organizational name, you should include it so that you can, this basically shows up on the cert that you generate. But most of this, email address, you don't need to do any of that. Let's see. All right. This says, now you must take a manual step. We need to add the root certificate to any laptops, desktops, tablets, and phones that will be accessing HTTPS sites one time. So for Mac users, which I am, it says open keychain access on your Mac, go to the certificates category in your system keychain. Once there, import the root.ca PEM, which we just created, using file import. So we'll go to keychain access. And I've added some stuff here before, but you would go to file, import items, and then you just have to navigate to the PEM file that we created. So it would be, the script will automatically put it where it needs to be. So it's in resources, key store, there it is. So we will add this. And now you can see why some of those optional names. So I had put in PGL software code reviews. There it is. I double clicked it. You go to trust. I say always trust, which is again in the documentations in the script. I close this. I type in my password. So now that's in my keychain access. It says press enter when you've done the manual step. So we do enter. It's asking for the passphrase again. We're going to use password 123. Password 123. Password 123. And boom. It says update application local properties file with the relevant info to enable HTTPS SSL. So this is what I showed you before, but it's basically telling you make sure server ports 8443, enabled is true, key alias is PJL, this alias is used in the bash script. It's kind of hard-coded. But this P12 alias is PJL. You can change it here if you'd like to do something different. And then the password you've been using, make sure it's there. This is the location that's been defined in the script. And then use that password again. So if you've done what I've done, that would just be password 123. So let's try and start Spring again. And look at that. Tomcat initialized on port 8443. So, one that you've all been waiting for. Does localhost 8443 work? It does. Boom. All right. So this was a huge step forward. It's a small thing, but our environment that we're going to be developing on is that much closer to prod. This was a big win. What we're going to do next is I'm going to containerize the backend application. So right now you have to use Java 17, Corretto. There's some local setup you might have to do to actually run my code. I'm going to containerize it so that if you have Docker, that's all you need. Everything will run. The code will bring everything it needs, and we'll containerize it. And that's going to be our next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.